All right. Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. My name is Shiri Friedman. I'm really excited to be here today, along with my colleagues Erik and Meredith. We have a very special 1 hour LinkedIn Live scheduled, a lot of material to cover called Ask the Interviewers. So it is high season right now for interviewing, lots of people applying for different jobs. A great opportunity to hear directly from Erik and Meredith, who have held a number of jobs, who have built a number of teams, who have interviewed many, many candidates over their career, especially within the data space. So a lot to cover. Let's get started right away with quick introductions so we know who we're talking to. Erik, who are you?
Yes, thank you, Shiri. I'm Erik. I'm currently doing data engineering and also stuff like this for Hightouch. And previously, I've been in a lot of business intelligence focused roles as a manager, as a consultant, but also doing things like data engineering and analytics engineering, kind of everything in between. So I would say my interests in data are myriad and diverse, and always looking to learn more, kind of throughout the the world of data. Yeah, that would be me.
Okay. And if you hired dozens of data people in your career, hundreds of data people, you probably
Dozens,
interviewed,
not hundreds.
but that means you've interviewed hundreds probably.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And Meredith, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Meredith. I'm very excited to be here today. I am a data engineer, so I have a very extensive background in SQL. I started off my career in software as a SQL developer / data architect, and gradually transitioned my way into analytics, which is where I am today. I also love developing learning resources for others. For the past 4 years now, I've been working in modern data stack technology, in specifically Redshift and Snowflake. I work really extensively with dbt, also Fivetran, and recently Hightouch, since I've joined Hightouch as a data engineer. My primary interests are really around code maintainability and good team processes. I love being parts of a team where we have efficient collaboration. So that's what gets me excited about my job.
Efficiency. Okay. All right. So the way this is going to work, and by the way, how many people have you interviewed, you think, over your
over my entire career, yeah, it would have to be probably around 300.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of perspective here. Okay. Okay, this is how it's going to work, LinkedIn world. We welcome your questions. We do have a bunch of questions that we're going to try to work our way through. We think these are the questions that you would like to hear answers to. But if you want to ask something right away, you don't want to see if we get to it, or you have your own idea of what would be helpful, we really do want this to be helpful to you. So go ahead and just post it in the comments. We'll see it, and I'll prioritize the question. But waiting for that first one to come in, we can get started with our own. Erik, let's start with you. What types of roles have you interviewed and hired?
Sure. I think the plurality of the interviews I've conducted have been for candidates for roles in BI analysts and BI engineers. So that would be number one, followed by analytics engineers for sure. And also kind of a smattering of like being involved with other hiring processes with other teams and functions like product. So I've interviewed a lot of product managers as well. Yeah, I would say mostly those.
Okay. And Meredith?
Yeah, mine's pretty close. In recent years, obviously, analytics engineer has been top, closely followed by data engineers, and then a little bit of data scientists as well.
Very nice. Good credentials. Okay, so start us off, Meredith. What is the standard interview process?
Yeah, so I think before we get into detail, interview processes really vary from company to company. A lot of it depends on what type of business they conduct, as well as the size of the organization. So Erik and I have seen a lot of things, but there's a lot of other things out there happening. In my experience, it always starts with a one-on-one phone call between the candidate and either someone from People Ops or the hiring manager. And this should really be a two-sided conversation where both sides are trying to figure out, is this a fit? So the candidate should really feel empowered to ask questions as well and make sure that they do truly want to be part of the interview process. And if that intro call goes well, then the candidate goes into the regular process, which it's typically going to have two different facets. One is the tech screen, making sure that the candidate has the skills to do the job and be somewhat self-sufficient when they get there. And then the second piece, which is also equally important, is making sure that they're a fit for the team and for the organization. So there might be business partners that chime in on this piece of the interview, but really making sure that not only is this person skilled with analytics, but that they also can add some value to our business. And so usually there's a couple of different phases on this. There can be some type of tech screen, which is an interview or maybe a take-home exercise, and then usually a panel interview that's going to include a few people across the org. How about you, Erik?
Yeah, I can speak to kind of the processes I've seen in the past, but it looks like we got a question that just came in. Sherry, do you think we should jump in on that first?
Well, why don't you let's wrap up the question about the process as you expect, and then we'll get straight to Sergey's question.
Yeah. I mean, to Meredith's point, the process varies extremely widely by organization. In my consulting days, even though we were tasked largely with implementation and, technical work and consulting, we were involved sometimes with helping build out teams for our clients. And so we got to see some of their processes. And again, they were just all over the place. We worked with Fortune 500 companies. We worked with like small, 8-person VC firms. So it was all over the place. But what I can speak to is probably the average of those processes, and also the rough framework that I employed the most often. And like Meredith said, it obviously starts with usually a one-on-one conversation. I like to, whenever I talk about interview processes, emphasize the importance of having a good partner in people ops or recruiting. It's a 0 to a 1. Like when you have a really solid recruiter helping you build your team, it just feels amazing. So shout out to the recruiters I've worked with in the past. You know who you are. Love you. But yeah, so that's always the beginning. Then I like to save the panel interview for last because it's expensive. It's a lot of people's time, and you don't want to, use that if you don't need it. In between, the order here varies, but I usually do a technical exercise, rather a technical interview. I tend to do live ones, and then also just the hiring manager one-on-one. So, and then sometimes there'll be a fifth component if we feel like it's really necessary, where instead of a panel with representatives from different teams around the business, there's a few people from the team that they're joining that just get a real feel for, hey, do I think this person's going to be a real, add to the team or a multiplier. So that's the rough process that I'm usually, part of or use when I'm hiring.
Okay. So the question that came in from Sergey, thanks for participating. I don't know Sergey, but I'm excited about this. What are some red flags that you look for that may be non-obvious or non-technical?
I've got one small idea.
All right,
yeah.
You start us, Erik.
This one, non-obvious is what inspired this. So one thing that I think about that I don't hear talked about a lot is I'm always looking for enthusiasm and interest in the role and the company and really just the world of data. But sometimes interest in a different sort of layer of the stack or role within data can be dangerous, because if you hire somebody as a data engineer when really deep down you can tell that they want to be a data scientist, you might be setting them up for disappointment and ultimately failure. So that's one thing I look for. It's a small thing.
Okay. And Meredith?
Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you. I definitely would tail and agree with Erik on the enthusiasm. For me, a really big red flag is if a candidate doesn't have any questions. Usually in a panel interview, we bake in time for the candidate to have questions. And if the candidate doesn't have questions, that to me as an interviewer says that they're not really interested in the job, and they're probably applying a lot of different places, so they don't have anything specific to our team to learn about.
Good point. That is always suspicious. Okay, David also just put in a question. Meredith, what are your thoughts on portfolios and creative ways to show your past work and projects?
Hey, David, I'm excited you're here. David's a colleague of mine from Brooklyn Data. Yeah, I think anything that you can do to show that analytics is something that you care about and that you're willing to put time into, it really sets you apart from other candidates. I don't think it's a must-have, especially if you look at your resume and you have a lot of, very reputable organizations already on your resume. People probably aren't going to be looking as closely for other details. If you are just starting out in your career and you've attended a great boot camp and you've put together resources, absolutely that will help. I think anyone who doesn't have a lengthy resume as well, the resources really do help.
Erik, do you have thoughts on that one, on portfolios or creative ways to show the work you've done?
Yeah, just a quick thought. Anecdotally, having seen as many interviews and conducted as many interviews as I have, it's rare to see. I think it's, to Meredith's point, that makes it not a must, right? So, if you're worried about, are all the other candidates going to have it? It's not that common, but hey, it is pretty cool when you do see it. So, take that how you will.
Got it. All right, another question came in for you, Erik. I'd be curious where you draw the line between data engineers, analytics engineers, and BI analysts. How are the skill sets different for those roles?
Totally. Guaranteed this is going to be answered differently by like every person in the world. So yeah, this is my answer. But, to me, I'll start with analytics engineer because how I most recently defined it on the team that I built at my prior company was really broadly defined. So analytics engineer for us sort of meant full stack data person. And I know that that's not common, but it's just an example of how widely these definitions vary. We sort of treated analytics engineer like somebody who could operate as a data engineer, as the canonical definition of an analytics engineer, as well as a BI analyst / engineer, right? Not really anywhere outside those boundaries, but those three for sure. Not expecting them to be like an analyst per se, but definitely operate on the infrastructure from bottom to top. That said, I think more traditionally, data engineers are, the split between them and analytics engineers is like data engineers are more focused on infrastructure, whereas the analytics engineers are more focused on modeling and transformation. And then BI analysts / engineers, I've seen it both ways, are focused on basically taking that product that results from the analytics engineering work and driving business value from it. That would be my answer to that.
Okay, that's clean. Meredith, how do you designate between them?
I think Erik did a great job explaining the definition of each one. When we start looking at the interviewing process, I think when we talk about a data engineer, we're going to ask some more fundamental software engineering discipline type questions, where when we look at a BI analyst, we really want to understand the story that they're able to tell with data. And I think analytics engineers can go either way. They obviously have the ability to model and transform data, but I do see more and more analytics engineers stepping outside of those really clean lines between the roles. So I think analytics engineer combines the two, and it really depends on the person's individual interests and where their skills are.
Okay. Erik, let's talk about the interview process. What's with asking people to do take-home exercises, technical work?
This is a fun one. I don't. I typically don't. I have in the past, especially in my consulting days, but this might be more a style thing than anything, but I don't like getting them, so I don't like giving them in general. I see arguments for them, but I prefer, on average, and hey, maybe I'll change my tune on this eventually, but like prefer, for the most part, to do a live technical exercise instead of a take-home.
Mm. Interesting. Okay, Meredith, you go live, or what's your style?
Yeah. So I disagree entirely. I really enjoy technical exercises from an interviewer's perspective. I think, doing so many in-person tech screens and asking the same questions. What are the differences between joins? What are Windows functions? Explain how you would handle duplicates in a query. It's very difficult, I think, to kind of go through that over and over again, where a person can do that independently. And then when we spend time together, we can really dig into the interesting questions. I'm interested though, Erik, when you've done the live coding exercises, what does that look like? Is that just you and the candidate working together?
Yeah, typically. And one thing that if we do it right, so I've had, different tests over the years, and most recently I had one I liked where you actually were writing SQL against a real database and you could actually get real results. And so there was a trial and error component that you could see happen before your eyes. But one thing that was kind of fun about it, didn't always pan out this way, but occasionally gave me great signal was the questions they ask, the clarifying questions they ask, which I'm not sure if I would get in the same capacity if I made that a take home.
Yeah, and I agree with you to some extent. The few times that I've conducted that pairing exercise with a candidate where we work on a problem together, I always felt that the candidate seemed a little bit under pressure. I don't think anyone likes to watch someone type or,
Yeah.
type in front of an audience. So now that you've explained that it's one-on-one, I have only had, as a candidate, I've only had one live coding exercise, and it was for a group of people, and it was horrible. But you get through it. I think, whenever somebody's watching, the typing doesn't quite come as naturally as it does without
That's definitely true. Yeah. I mean, to your point, even with a one-on-one, sometimes you can get a situation where a candidate underrepresents their abilities because of the pressure in that scenario. So there's always pros and cons.
Meredith, when you are interviewing, what are the top characteristics or qualities you're looking for?
I think that there's a number of qualities, depending on the role again. So when we talk about analytics professionals and what makes someone effective in analytics, they're really able to derive value and bring that value to the surface very easily. So when I see a resume, that's something that I'm looking for. How do they present the value within their background? And I think that basic skill does translate to what we do as analytics engineers or data engineers. But in terms of the conversation with a candidate, I really appreciate candidates who've done a little bit of research, who understand our business, and they have good questions. A lot of times, companies now are giving candidates more information than we used to get. So you'll often see these 3 people will be in the panel interview. Here's their LinkedIn profiles so that the candidate knows what to expect. I always appreciate seeing the candidate look at my LinkedIn profile before the interview. It really does show that this isn't just an interview to them. This is something that they're interested in learning more about the team and about the company.
Erik, how about you? What do you look for?
I'll answer this in 2 ways. So one, I guess I'll start with I'll end with the one that I think actually segues well into the question that just came in. So one is, and depending on the role, to Meredith's point, like the ability to partner with your partner teams, right? So for the analytics engineer, for example, they really need to be able to partner a lot internally with data engineers and with BI, analysts and engineers. The BI folks, they need to really partner well with business stakeholders. So that's something I'm like poking and prodding for them in a big way. As that's emphasized for them, what's emphasized for the data engineer on the other side, a couple degrees upstream, is the ability to partner well with software engineers and product managers. And basically, assuming that they're going to be consuming data from some sort of production environment, you're working at a tech company, let's say, right? You're going to be able to communicate well and express your problems and opinions and things like that to the people who are actually creating that data upstream of you. So that's a big one. The second thing I would say I look for is definitely akin to kind of, similar in spirit to what Meredith was talking about, is enthusiasm, but a very particular type. So, I'm looking for people who are going to have fun in the role, not just in data, but in the role that I'm slotting them in for, or that they're applying for, right? Because even if they're big data people, they're going to be frustrated if they'd rather be doing data science, but they're forced to do data engineering. So that's something I'm really sniffing for a lot as well.
Okay. And Sergey just dropped in another question. You want to address that one, Erik? Can you recall a time when you got it wrong? And what do you think you missed or misjudged initially?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And so just sort of piggybacking off of the latter part of the previous answer, I would say almost every time I've gotten it wrong, it's been because it's not the candidate's fault, it's my fault for not thoroughly, vetting the match between their interests and the function, right? Because I would say 9 times out of 10, they're going to be successful and, the team's going to be happy with that person and their performance if they are happy with the job, right? If they're having fun and they're engaged, they're usually going to succeed. That's my kind of primary metric. So the couple of times that I think I've made big mishires, it's been entirely on my own doing from not thoroughly vetting. Are they going to enjoy this enough?
Meredith, how about you? Is there a time where you got it wrong?
I would agree with what Erik said. I have also felt that way. I think when you are interviewing someone, you want them to do well and you want them to be successful. So I think it's more of an experienced interviewer who's able to make that determination. Is this really a good role that will make this person happy? Which is always hard to judge. And so I think if the candidate is qualified, we tend to lean more towards let's give it a try. But I would definitely say when I first started interviewing for analytics roles, specifically data analysts, something that I learned is the skill set of a data analyst when they have the very strong visualization, storytelling, data presentation, and discovery skills. I think some of those tech skills that we really lean on in the tech screening are things that they can learn at work. So for me, I really had to evaluate what kind of skills, a balance of both sides of skills is the minimum that we would need. So I definitely, as I have experienced more and more interviews, I think I'm better able to realize that there are skills that you learn on the job and not everyone comes 100% with everything they need on day one.
Nice point. I appreciate that. Erik, what should we expect the panel experience to look like? What should I expect in the panel interview?
Yeah, I bet you I've had pretty much the same sort of panel interview setup for most of the interviews I've run or been a part of, and it comes in two flavors. One more common, the more common one that we really try to always do, that I've always tried to do is get the 2 or 3, maybe 4 primary teams that our team is going to be interfacing with. Maybe it's different at different companies, but maybe it's sales, marketing, product, and finance. But it could really be any number of combinations. So there's usually I've usually had software engineers involved as well. So 3 or 4 people that represent different teams that we interface with a lot. They're coming with a lot of questions that are trying to basically vet your ability to kind of work with that team, right? Do you understand them? Can you empathize with them, at least to the degree that will make you an effective partner? The other flavor is a panel interview that's really just about the team you're joining. And that tends to be more about, do we think that this person is complementary to do they add something new to the team that we don't already have necessarily? Those are the kind of 2 flavors that I've seen the most.
How about you, Meredith?
Yeah, I think panel interviews, in my experience, have been something that we try to standardize. So usually there's 10 questions that go into the panel interview, and we use the same set of questions for every candidate. So the panel interview to me is a little bit more formal for the interviewer. I really like the setup where we take turns in the panel with giving questions, and then we allow the candidate to ask a question. I think that is a very effective use of panel interviews because the candidate doesn't just have their hiring manager. They get a good view of this is the type of team that I'll be working with, and now I can ask some questions to really understand how that team functions. So that's my experience with panel interviews.
Nice. All right, well, we got another good question from the audience, which we welcome. You guys should submit some more. David asked, this is what he wrote. I work with veterans transitioning into tech, and one of the most common things I see a lot of is imposter syndrome. What advice can I share with them to make them feel more comfortable about their first interviews with people in data communities? Meredith, you want to start that one?
Absolutely. Great question, David. I think One thing that candidates have today that is really powerful are all of the wonderful data communities. There are so many people out there who are willing to help look at resumes, help practice. I've seen it on DBT Slack, a number of other communities that I'm a part of. There are lots of people who are willing to get on Zoom with a candidate and throw out, here are some questions that you probably will be asked. So imposter syndrome is a really tough thing to overcome. I would encourage candidates to give the process a try and to ask for help within data communities. I can't imagine a community that wouldn't step up for a person who's trying to break into data. There's so many great resources for that. Another thing that I think is important, in my background in software engineering, I felt like the interview process was really a weed out process, and it was meant to be challenging and it was meant to make you uncomfortable. And I have not experienced that probably in the last 5 years, and especially not in data. I think I have gone into interviews where the candidate is not familiar with a lot of the terms that come up in the interview questions, and we pivot, right? We're not going to keep asking a candidate something to make them feel like, wow, I don't know anything. So I think, especially in analytics, I've been pleasantly surprised by how well candidates are treated in interviews. And, David, as you well know, being that that's the area that you work in, I think that we're very conscious of what is a good candidate experience. And that in most organizations that I've worked in, you aren't being put in an interview until you've gone through some training and you're really empathetic and you care about that candidate's experience and how they view your company at the end of that interview. So I know imposter syndrome is really difficult, but I would encourage people to just take the chance.
Erik, I'd love to hear your answer to this too. How you recommend people deal with imposter syndrome, especially early in their career in this space?
Sure. I think I'm thinking about it on two levels. One more closely related to what Meredith is touching on, but the other is just sort of a tactical tidbit. I've found in my own personal experience as a candidate, but also interviewing candidates, that it's in your best interest typically to not try to misrepresent your skills, right? And your level with those skills. So, for example, I'm interviewing two candidates for the same role. If fundamentally they have the same skill set, but one is kind of misrepresenting it and trying to make it seem like more than it is, it's going to be harder to get signal from that person or trust signal from that person, period, regardless of the topic of conversation or the question in the interview. The other, however, is expressing intellectual vulnerability, which as a manager, I've always appreciated, because I know that nobody on my team, myself included, knows everything, right? We all are constantly learning. And that's what I'm actually more interested in, is a desire, willingness, and ability to learn than having those skills in the first place. Like Meredith said earlier, a lot of the tech skills and data, in my opinion, are learnable by just about anybody, right? It's really just about, are you going to have fun doing that? So that's kind of what I would say is be honest, be open, and show that you want to learn and are willing to learn. Maybe now going more towards Meredith's note there about community, maybe taking some time to prepare in the sense of, getting to know what's out there and finding resources to do a little bit of learning ahead of time can help you feel better. Even if it, obviously there's the argument that yes, you can do some training to actually know more ahead of the interview, but I would say it's at least as beneficial to boost your confidence, right? So those are kind of the two angles I would take on that.
I like that. I like doing what you can to boost your confidence going in. Meredith, what are going back to the idea of like the value of the questions that the candidates ask, what do you think are some good questions that a candidate should come prepared with?
This is a good one. Well, I think, we've talked a little bit about there are skills that can be taught on the job. I think interest and curiosity is something that the candidate has to bring on day one. So to me, this is the most important part of prepping for the interview. especially if you're going to a panel interview, expect to have 3 or 4 questions. And one thing that has been interesting to me as a candidate going through processes, just because the hiring manager or the person from People Ops answered your question in your first interview, you might get a completely different answer from the data engineer who's actually doing that job. So this is an opportunity to ask everyone those questions. Questions that I especially like are questions that show that you're really thinking about the quality of your work. I had one candidate ask, what advice would you give me to be successful in this job? So really that desire to be successful and to deliver high quality work, if you can ask questions to that regard, I do think that's helpful.
What about you, Erik? Some great questions you've heard from candidates, or you wish you could hear from candidates?
Sure. I think this might be a little bit too particular, but some things I really enjoy getting from candidates in terms of questions are, this is, again, role dependent. So if you're like a data engineer, especially, I like to hear this, but just a lot of curiosity about the current stack that's in place at a company, because ideally they care about it, right? And they want to, either influence it or learn about it, right? If some of the elements are needed and technologically. Beyond that, I would say, regardless of role, I like when candidates ask about what our biggest current problems are, both as a team and a business, right? Because that shows interest on both levels and a desire to work on problems worth solving.
Nice. We did get a nice comment, by the way, that came in. So we're about halfway through the hour, guys. Lots more questions to go, but we also have space to welcome yours. So keep them coming. I love seeing the Devin, David conversation going on the sidelines here. Okay, so to Meredith and Erik, to both of your points on skills you learn on the job, what is the hardest skill to impart to people on the job in these data roles?
It's a good one.
Either of you want to start with that?
This might be ill-formed, but this can't be the hardest, but it's definitely hard. I think the ability to work with the requisite partners and stakeholders, it's hard. At least it's hard for me to teach that. I try, but it's easier to teach SQL than it is to teach someone how to be a good partner to a software engineer or a good partner to the head of sales.
Nice. Good answer. Very specific. And Meredith, what do you think?
I agree with Erik. That is exactly what I was thinking, but I would take it a little bit further. I think one thing that is really hard about working in analytics is getting a lot of requests that are very prescriptive, and they don't allow the analyst to also contribute insights. And I think the number one, especially in the climate that we're in right now, the number one important skill for anyone on the data team is to be able to show value in the work that you've created. And so I would say the hardest skill for anyone is the ability to say no. I think that there's a lot of prescriptive requests that come through that will suck up every minute of your time if you can't say no. So it's a very, very difficult skill. And, obviously it's not a rude, no way, I'm not doing this kind of no, but negotiating and really making sure that you're not taking your time or your team's time without a task that's going to show value to the business.
That's a great answer.
I bet.
Erik, how do I explain in the interview process why I'm leaving my current position?
Yeah, that is always tricky. I think it always depends on the circumstances of why you're truly leaving. On the whole, more often than not, it's this might be also on a more tactical level as opposed to really thoughtful. But in my own experience, I've seen a lot of success with talking more about why you want to join than why you want to leave. Right? Look forward, not backwards. That is kind of my general rule of thumb. Anytime I'm answering this question for anyone who's wondering, because you often do get asked, right? Almost always, why are you leaving your current company? Especially if the title is the same, or even if the industries are, especially if the industries are similar as well, then you have less to go on in terms of, I want to get into this or I want to get into that. So you have to identify the things that excite you about the next role and it's okay to be honest about what you didn't want to do in your prior role, but generally you're going to have a little bit more success. I hope that this feels like something that you can actually employ. But yeah, I find more success with looking forward, not backwards.
Good tip. And Meredith?
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think enthusiasm about the role that you're applying for can somewhat negate this question. But I think we are learning that it's a very normal thing for people to seek new challenges in analytics. Not every role is a fit for everyone. I've worked at wonderful companies with amazing people and just have not felt utilized or challenged. So I think if the question is really pushed, it's a good opportunity for you to learn more about the job that you're applying for and making sure that it is going to have the right level of challenge for you. So I'd almost turn it back around as an opportunity.
I like that. Meredith, let's talk about the negative, the hard questions that you get. So a negative question like, tell me about a time you failed. How do you recommend interviewees handle a question like that?
Yeah, I hate these questions, just to be like perfectly honest. This is the worst question to get in an interview. But if you take a step back, it is a really good question because we learn through failure and we learn through being tested. So if you have a situation, and this is what I would recommend to a candidate, first prepare for this question because most people do ask it. But to look at what is a great lesson that you learned at work, and then step back and say, how did you learn that lesson? And really reframe it that way. But it is a difficult question because you don't want to pick something where maybe you didn't take enough time and you were negligent. I mean, it really needs to be something that you put your best effort in. It didn't work out, but you learned something. And that's really the important thing to emphasize as you answer the question is, what is it that you learned and what do you take with you that makes you avoid that situation in the future?
Erik, anything to add to that? Sure. I definitely would just echo all of that. Like the core of that being, you do need to talk about a time you learned something, right? Just failure in a vacuum doesn't sound great. You definitely have to have that upswing at the end. And ideally it comes from just a real experience. So to Meredith's point, prepare for this, think back on your experiences and think about a time you actually were grateful for the lesson you learned about a failure. I'm fortunate in the sense that in my years in consulting, there were plenty of failures for me to look back on. We had a lot of successes too, but it was such a challenging and diverse environment in terms of the problems that we had to address that there were plenty of lessons for me to draw from. So now, since then, when I've been in interviews as a candidate, I really just look back on real experiences and think about, okay, what can I talk about here? Hopefully I choose the one that feels the most relevant to, hey, this lesson and what I learned from it applies directly to my ability to meet the needs of this role that I'm applying for here. The last thing I would note there, though, is that it is also okay to admit that the problem isn't fully solved. I don't know if you would agree with this, Meredith. I don't know if I've ever talked about this with anybody, but I've even been so honest as to say, that was a failure. I'm still working on that, and talk about just a genuine weakness that I know about myself. Because at the end of the day, they're going to know about it anyway. So I wouldn't go too crazy with that, but I've gotten jobs while being that forthright before.
We did get a nice follow-up question to this. So we will get back to Sharon or Sharon's question in a second, but Mubarak first asked this follow-up. Sometimes, especially without a lot of experience, you've not really failed at anything. So how do you answer a question like this? How do you answer the question in this situation?
I would suggest maybe taking if you don't have a failure that's directly applicable to the profession or the role, it might be appropriate to take a failure from your personal life, without getting too personal. Yeah.
I think that's fair game. Meredith, what do you think?
Yeah, I didn't think of it from this perspective. That's a really great question. Um, yeah, I mean, I would always sort of lean towards honesty. And if you don't have a great lesson that you've learned, maybe an opportunity that you missed or something that you really feel that you're compelled to learn and you haven't gotten there yet.
I
That's
like
a
that
great question.
because maybe it's not a failure like 100% failure, but like you only got 80% or 90%, which is you're still proud of. But like, what did you learn from that missing gap? I think the way you guys talked about like what can you learn from this is
Yeah.
really, really powerful. I appreciate that. Okay, Mubarak, if you have a follow-up to that, let us know. But let's get to Sharon's question, which is back to the previous topic. If I'm a candidate who switched 3 companies in the last 2 years, how does it look? How do I look for the interviewers? And he specifically explained, I was laid off in the 2 companies, so I had to find a new job. So how do you talk through layoffs, especially the last few years? They've been a lot in quick succession.
Yeah. I think being honest about it. One thing that I've noticed about the current climate, layoffs are so widespread, and it really has nothing to do with the people being laid off. It's companies are over hiring, and then they have to compensate for that down the road. I would never, and Erik, I'd be interested in your opinion too. I don't think I would ever, as an interviewer, put any type of judgment on a person who's been laid off. I think laid off is really outside of your control. And especially right now, I actually, as an interviewer, I think I would be even more motivated to find the positive qualities to help the person do well in the interview. What about you, Erik?
I feel similarly. I don't, I have no business passing judgment on somebody for being laid off. That's out of your control. I think that being honest about it is important, right? Just without anything else, speaking to your experience genuinely is usually something that interviewers can pick up on. And just speaking for myself, like with Meredith, that I have no problem with that. That's totally a non-issue because that has no bearing on the rest of how you perform in the process. If the team feels like you're going to be a valuable addition, if your experience lends itself well to the problems we're trying to solve as a team, then I have no problem if you work 5 different places in the last 2 years. Especially if that part of that was out of your hands. So it definitely depends. Like the resume look with gaps or quick changes. Again, context is important. Are they layoffs? Are they just you choosing to leave because it's not a fit? Whatever it is, either way, you have to be able to explain it in a way that you feel good about. And kind of going back to the whole look forward, not back thing. When you do get asked that, if you do get asked that to explain that experience, I encourage you to end your answer with a forward-looking statement around why any and or all of that makes you excited about what you're applying for now.
Great. Let's talk. Did you want to add something there, Meredith?
I think if you have a significant amount of time between jobs, it's a really great opportunity. There's so many resources, free resources, be able to show something that, instead of getting down about the situation, which is completely relatable. I am in no way saying that you have to be upbeat about it all the time, but I think if you can channel that into using the time to further maybe a skill that you want to excel in or improve, that looks really good as well.
We just got a really fun question from Kevin, which is a little bit off topic for just where we've been, but I think we can move in this direction. Kevin, thank you for chiming in. Let's start with you, Meredith. What are good questions to assess how much the company actually cares about data? Like, is it lip service or core to the business?
This is a great question. I think there's a number of areas that we could go into. One would be how our data problems resolved? What's the reaction? If I'm making, all kinds of quality checks within my transformation logic, what happens? Are we just reporting that the data is not bad? Or what steps are we taking to avoid those problems down the line? So, one instance that I can think of, I worked for an organization that had an extremely customized Salesforce implementation without any validation. So it was just free form everywhere. And I definitely think if you were to ask, like, how often are you having quality issues and what are you doing about them? To me, that's the interesting question. What are you doing about data issues? But
That's
yeah,
great.
that's a great question,
Right.
Kevin.
Erik, how about you?
That's also a really interesting answer, I think, Meredith, because that's not what first came to mind for me, but it does resonate with me. I think that if you see a team taking data quality really seriously, that is an indicator, I would say a likely indicator that the business takes data seriously as well. So I love that. That reminds me of a lot of experiences I've had where it's on both ends of the spectrum. Nobody cares about data quality, or you care to a great degree. The other thing I would add, though, is that you end up having to ask about data can be seen as like a service function a lot, but you can also think about it like a product, right? And what is the product that you are building for the business? So you could ask questions along those lines, like what would you consider to be, the phraseology doesn't matter, but basically asking, what is this team's product that you're building or suite of products that you're building that serve the business, and what are the impact of those products on those end consumers, right? For example, let's say BI, right? Like one of our primary products is reporting and business intelligence. Okay, who's consuming that? Why and to what degree, right? Are you getting like minimal usage on a very expensive BI platform? So poking and prodding there can help you get a gauge for how important data is to the business as well.
I think I would add a little bit to that too. Sometimes it can be an opportunity for you as an analytics professional. So I would maybe even go another step with the question of how much in my role, how much influence do I have? How can I influence data quality within our organization? Because I have joined teams where quality has been a big issue. And honestly, it's been fun to work with the team and get things under control. So I personally wouldn't see it as a deal breaker. I really would want to know how much influence I could have over changing it.
Nice. Erik, let's go back to, you made a comment a few minutes ago about the resume. How important is the resume?
Okay. I like answering this one because I have a silly answer for it, but it's a real one. So I think it's both extremely important and not important at all. And the reason I say that is it kind of depends on how you're applying for a role. On one hand, if you are a referral or somebody on the team that you're trying to join or something along those lines, it's much less important, right? It serves as a way to contextualize your application to those who don't already know you and things like that. But for the most part, they're going to be counting on their actual conversations with you then. So then it's not so important. If you are applying for a role where you are part of a large applicant pool and you don't necessarily have somebody to pull you to the top of that stack of resumes, and make sure you have that first conversation with that recruiter or that hiring manager, then it's of paramount importance for that part of the process, and then it's no longer important. But it is important at the beginning there to say, hey, at least have that conversation with me, and then take it from there.
Meredith, how about you?
I do not enjoy reading resumes, so I may be a little bit biased. I very much appreciate a candidate who doesn't make me work too hard to see their value. I don't want to have to read through like 10 intense bullet points. It's great. What you've done is great. You did wonderful projects, but please make it easy. Bring it out to the top, stand out somehow, like a very great about me statement, something interesting, list out your skills outside of like long wordy sentences. Resumes are very dry to read. So in my opinion, I think if you can highlight yourself and make it something that a person can glance at it and see your value right away. Then they say, okay, now I'll read your bullet points.
And what about cover letters? How do you feel about those, Meredith?
The cover letter is tricky. I know, Sherry, we talked about this the other day, that people don't often submit cover letters. It's a little bit tricky because it's not required. And so I think what the cover letter does is it gives you a chance, if you don't feel that your resume is a perfect fit for the job, but your attitude and your interest is above and beyond, and you really want a chance to showcase that. So the other thing that, as an interviewer, if I see a cover letter on the application package, to me, that says this is not a person who's just applying with a single resume and sending it out to 10 companies. This is a person who wants to work with us, especially if they highlight that within the cover letter. That's also very interesting to the interviewer.
Erik, how do you feel about cover letters?
I feel similarly to them about them as I do about the portfolio a little bit, actually. So I think that as we said, anecdotally, you rarely see these things, but you can use that to your advantage, right? Especially if you are new to the industry, you're trying to break in, or you're new to the workforce. If you're in any of those situations where you're trying to make that first step, then use it as a differentiator, because almost nobody else has it. I could promise you that. If you don't have a portfolio yet, then definitely do the cover letter. But also in the similar spirit to Meredith's answer about resumes, don't make it too verbose, right? You're taking away from that hiring manager's day if you create an encyclopedia that they need to parse when they're actually processing your application. So make it concise, make it clear.
Include it strategically and short and sweet is sort of what you guys are saying. Okay, got you. All right, we heard the chime on someone's calendar. That means we have less than now 10 minutes to go. So a few more questions we definitely have time to incorporate a few more questions from the audience. So keep them coming, guys. Erik, what's your advice before going into an interview?
My advice before going into an interview. There's so much you could say here. Honestly, yeah. Like a lot of the really basic stuff is stuff that I forget sometimes. Like, be good to yourself. Make sure you're in a state that is comfortable and relaxed as much as is possible. Interviews are naturally nerve-wracking, so it's okay if you're a little nervous. But if you can, have that favorite breakfast, make sure you drink plenty of water, sleep well the night before. That's huge, because after a certain point, there's no more prep you can do. It's like a final in college or something like that. In the 11th hour, there was no longer anything else you can do, but just prepare your mind and body to just be present and authentic and relaxed. So that's one thing. The only other thing I would say is to do your homework. Make sure, like Meredith touched on, you will see a lot of applications coming from folks who you can tell that they're just firing applications to everywhere that they can easily and quickly. If you manage to do that and then get an interview, it'll be clear that that's your game, because you haven't done your homework on like what the company is, like what the role is really about. You haven't read the job description, that kind of thing. So do your basic homework too. So fundamentals.
Gotcha. Meredith, how about you? Advice for the morning of?
Well, I have a real answer, but first, to state something extremely obvious. If you don't have good home internet, go someplace where you do. I think as an interviewer, when the candidate has really bad internet service, we lose so much of that precious time that we could both be using to learn about each other. I actually think of one specific case where I interviewed this candidate who was really great for about the 3 minutes that I could hear her answers, and the rest, it was all. And so I wrote in my evaluation, I said, she seems great, but I didn't get most of what she was saying. And that's what everyone else put in their interviews. So, obviously that's something that you need to think about. But aside from that, just like Erik said, I think being genuine, again, I'm going to go into saying, 5 years ago, interviewing was very different. I think the formality of interviewing while you still want to be respectful and on time and prepared and courteous and not speak over people, you don't want to be too stiff and formal. You really want to make sure that you're being yourself in the interview. I think that that's very important, and keeping it conversational. One thing that is so hard to learn as a candidate is you need to relax and not worry so much what they're thinking about you, because you need to ask questions too, or else you're going to end up in a job that's not a right fit for you. So I would greatly recommend research as much as you can about the team. A lot of companies, you can see public GitHub projects. You can see what kind of code they're writing, what kind of team standards they have. Do your research, and whatever is available, find out about it, and anything that concerns you, ask about it. You know, this is your time too, to make sure that you're making the right decision for you.
One final note would be that as we were preparing for this session and planning it, you know, Meredith and I were just talking about interviews, and you emphasized, Meredith, the importance of asking good questions. And that's something that I can say from experience. I've gotten better at this over time. I used to be very bad at it. I didn't prepare good questions in advance. And when you brought that up, that really struck a chord. So just want to throw that one in there as well.
Another nice question came in from Kevin. What do you think about certifications? Are they a worthwhile investment?
I'm curious. I'm really curious to hear what you think, Meredith. But I can go first, and feel free to disagree. I think it kind of depends on the certification, but I actually really like them. You know, I've gotten a few myself that helped me contextualize certain bits of knowledge that I gathered, especially early in my career, right? You know, when I was learning about the cloud more, getting that entry level and next step AWS certification, even if I never applied a lot of the very detailed knowledge that I had to, accumulate to pass that exam, it still did a good job of contextualizing a lot of the services and products that exist today in the data world. So I find them valuable. It's not a huge differentiator between candidates and applications, but it is one for me, at least.
Okay. Meredith, certifications?
Yeah, I would agree. It's not a game changer either way. I'm a lot more interested in the person's attitude than the piece of paper of a certification. But it does show that, you had the discipline to go take the test. And the certifications that I've gotten, I don't think that they really helped me or hurt me in any way, but they did take time. They took a lot of, studying and going someplace to sit for an exam. So I think it does show interest in what you do, but it certainly isn't going to push the needle to a yes, for sure.
Got it. Okay, this is the last question we have prepared, which is kind of perfect timing. What is your advice before even getting started in your job search? Meredith.
So I think right now there is just an overwhelming amount of jobs, and they all sound somewhat similar. About a year ago, I realized that I needed to make a job change, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to go to DBT Slack, the jobs channel on DBT Slack, and find a couple of jobs. And really, there were so many. So I feel like you have to, kind of make a list of the ones that you're interested in and then research it before you apply. There are a lot of great ways to find jobs. We have LinkedIn and Glassdoor and, all of the traditional ones, Indeed. But really the Slack communities, that's where I have found my last 2 jobs have been through DBT Slack. That I think would be my first stop, but I would not recommend. It's so hard because, when I looked, there were so many appealing jobs. I was like, oh, I'm going to apply for this one. I'm going to apply for this. But I think you really need to take a step back and check out everything you can before you apply.
And Erik, bring us home.
Sure. I think it depends on if you're just getting started, breaking in, or if you're more established. If you're established, definitely think critically about what's going to make you happy, something that's going to really be engaging for you and help you take the next step in your career. If you're just getting started or breaking in, it's a little bit more about what's a role that I can take on that's going to boost me, that's going to like level me up and teach me a lot. And getting there, I would just echo what Meredith said about using the resources in the community at your disposal to land that first one.
Great. It's the top of the hour. Thank you, Erik. Thank you, Meredith. Thank all of you who participated, asked questions, many of you who are listening. If you have others, questions or things you want to follow up on, I'm sure Erik and Meredith would love to hear from you on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you found this helpful, and see you all again soon.
Yeah, thank you.